The air was thick with sorrow as the sun began to set, casting a soft, golden hue over the gathering. In the distance, the faint sound of bagpipes echoed, its haunting melody signaling the end of an era. The crowd stood motionless, their eyes fixed on the open coffin before them. Inside, AK-9 lay lifeless, its eyes closed forever, its loyal body wrapped in the folds of the American flag. A single soldier knelt beside the coffin, his face twisted in grief, tears silently streaming down his cheeks as he reached out, his trembling hand resting on the edge of the wooden box that held his partner, his best friend, his brother. The flag fluttered gently in the breeze, but the silence spoke volumes, louder than any words ever could. This wasn't just the funeral of a dog, it was the end of a bond that could never be broken, a bond that had been forged in battle and sealed in loyalty. The world would never understand the depth of this loss, but for the soldiers standing in that circle, nothing else mattered. This was their final goodbye. The veteran stood at the edge of the gravesite, his hands trembling as they gripped the edges of his uniform. His eyes stared blankly at the casket before him, the cold, sterile metal glinting in the bright sun. The ceremony was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional shuffle of boots. He had been through battles, wars, and moments of intense fear, but nothing compared to this moment of finality. His partner, his K-9, was gone, and this was the end of their journey together. He had seen death countless times. He had witnessed comrades fall, soldiers rise to honor, and the harsh realities of warfare. But this was different. This was personal. This was not a fellow soldier. This was his K-9, his best friend, the one who had saved his life more times than he could count, the one who had been by his side through every mission, every danger, every dark moment. The flag, draped over the coffin, fluttered gently in the wind as the veterans and soldiers around him stood in silent tribute. But for him, there was no peace, just a gnawing emptiness, a hollow feeling deep in his chest. The K-9 had been more than just a working animal. It had been a part of him, a shadow that followed his every move, a protector that never once faltered. And now, that bond was severed. As the final prayers were spoken, the veteran moved slowly toward the coffin. His boots, once strong and steadfast, felt heavy beneath him, as if they were burdened by the grief that weighed him down. The words of the ceremony seemed distant, irrelevant. Nothing could truly honor the bond he had shared with his K-9. Nothing could ever capture the depth of their connection. The wind blew through the trees, its mournful howl echoing the pain that echoed in his heart. He bent down, placing a hand gently on the coffin, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He had never imagined this day would come. No, he had always thought they would retire together, side by side. He would live out his days in peace, his K-9 beside him, guarding him even in the quiet moments of civilian life. But now, here he was, saying goodbye in the most final of ways. His throat tightened as he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for everything. You kept me safe, you kept me going when I didn't think I could anymore." His words broke, and a tear slipped down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily, but it only made the ache in his chest worse. The K-9 had been more than a tool. It had been a lifeline. It had given him purpose, companionship, and safety. And now, it was gone. He could feel the weight of the silence around him. The other soldiers stood with their heads bowed, their hands clenched at their sides. It was a moment of unity, a moment of shared loss. But for the veteran, it felt like he was drowning in the sorrow, sinking deeper with every passing second. As the ceremony continued, the veteran stepped back, his mind spinning. He couldn't look at the casket anymore. He couldn't bear to see the reality of the K-9's death right in front of him. Instead, he turned away, his pace quickening as he sought a quiet corner to collect himself. His heart pounded in his chest, and his vision blurred. He needed to escape the suffocating grief, the suffocating sense of finality. But before he could retreat, a soldier stepped in front of him, blocking his path. The veteran froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was another soldier, one he had known for years. They had trained together, fought side by side, and had witnessed the incredible bond between the veteran and his K-9. The soldier said nothing at first. He simply stood there, offering silent support. The veteran opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he nodded, allowing the soldier to guide him back to the ceremony. They didn't need to speak. The bond between them was enough. Back at the gravesite, the soldier placed a hand on the veteran's shoulder, offering a quiet comfort. The veteran didn't pull away. He just stood there, letting the silence of the moment wash over him. The K9's collar, now removed from its neck, was placed gently beside the coffin, a final token of the life it had lived. "Your K9 wouldn't want you to give up," the soldier said softly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. "He'd want you to keep fighting, to keep going, even when it hurts." The veteran closed his eyes. The soldier was right, of course. His K9 had never given up, never stopped fighting. It had always been there, watching his back, even when things seemed impossible. But the loss was overwhelming. How could he continue without the one thing that had always kept him going? "I don't know how," the veteran whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I can." The soldier gave him a firm pat on the back. "You'll find a way. You always do." For a moment, the veteran just stood there, the weight of the words hanging in the air. The soldier didn't say anything else. He simply stood beside him, offering the silent strength that the veteran needed. And in that silence, the veteran began to understand. The pain of the loss would never fully fade, but the bond he shared with his K9 would live on. It would never be forgotten. It would never be erased. As the ceremony drew to a close, the veteran turned away from the gravesite, his eyes focused straight ahead. He would never forget his K9. He would never forget the lessons it had taught him. The K9 had been more than just a partner. It had been a part of him, a piece of his soul. And as he walked away from the grave, he made a silent promise to honor that bond. No matter where life would take him next, the battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The veteran walked away from the gravesite, the weight of his grief pressing down on him with every step. His boots felt heavy, dragging against the gravel path as he made his way to the far corner of the cemetery. The wind had picked up, but it did little to cool the heat of the overwhelming sorrow that burned in his chest. He needed to escape, to find a place where he could breathe. But no matter how fast he walked, it felt like the pain was chasing him, relentless and unforgiving. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, but none of them made sense. The image of his K9 lying in the coffin, the lifeless body of his once vibrant companion, seemed to haunt him with every step he took. He could still feel the weight of the K9's collar in his hands, the warmth of the dog's body against his side. But that was gone now, gone forever, and there was nothing left but the emptiness that threatened to consume him. "Hey, sir." The voice caught him off guard, and the veteran froze, his heart skipping a beat. He turned slowly to find one of the younger soldiers standing a few paces away, his posture stiff, his eyes filled with concern. I'm sorry," the soldier said, his voice shaky. "I just wanted to say, we all saw how much your K9 meant to you. You weren't alone in that. We're all with you, sir." The veteran opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, he felt a lump form in his throat, and his eyes began to well up again. The soldier's words were kind, but they didn't change anything. His K9 was still gone, and no amount of sympathy could fill the gaping hole in his heart. "Thank you," the veteran finally managed to choke out. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was enough. The soldier gave him a nod and took a step back, allowing the veteran the space he so desperately needed. But even though the soldier had walked away, the veteran couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the soldier's gaze. It was the eyes of everyone in the cemetery. They were all looking at him, judging him, waiting for him to react. He could feel their stares on his back, their silent expectations weighing him down even more. It felt suffocating, overwhelming. He couldn't stay here any longer. Not in the crowd, not with all the eyes on him. He needed to find somewhere private, somewhere he could finally let the tears fall without anyone watching. As he made his way to the edge of the cemetery, he spotted an old bench beneath a tree. It was secluded, away from the rest of the crowd. He could finally be alone. But as he approached the bench, a familiar voice called out to him again. "Sir." The soldier from earlier spoke once more, this time with more urgency in his tone. "Please, wait." The veteran paused, his heart racing. He turned around slowly, expecting to see the same soldier. But this time, there were two other soldiers with him. They were all standing at attention, their faces serious, but soft with empathy. "You shouldn't be alone right now," one of the soldiers said. "We understand how hard this is, but we're here for you. We're not going anywhere." The veteran shook his head, his chest tight with emotion. "I don't need anyone," he muttered, more to himself than to the soldiers. I need to be alone." But the soldiers didn't move. They stood firm, their eyes unwavering as they looked at him. "We know you do, sir, but you don't have to do this alone," the soldier who had first spoken said gently. "Let us help you." The veteran took a deep breath, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The weight of their words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, he wondered if they were right. Maybe he didn't have to carry this burden on his own. Maybe there was strength in allowing others to help him. But before he could speak, a familiar feeling washed over him. It was the same feeling he had gotten when he first met his K9. That silent understanding, that unwavering bond. His heart clenched painfully as he realized that the K9 was no longer there. That bond was broken. "You don't understand," he said quietly, his voice cracking as the tears began to fall once again. "You don't know what it was like." He was everything. The soldiers stood in silence, allowing him to speak, allowing him to grieve. They didn't interrupt or try to comfort him with empty words. They simply waited, giving him the space he needed to process his pie. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the veteran wiped his eyes and looked up. He could feel the soldiers' eyes on him, their concern evident. "I don't know how to keep going without him," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The soldiers exchanged glances, and then one of them stepped forward. "We can't replace your K9, sir," he said quietly, his voice soft but steady. "But we can be here for you. We can help you honor his memory. We can remind you that you're not alone in this." The veteran looked at the soldiers, his breath shaky. They had no idea what it was like. They didn't understand the connection he had shared with his K9. No one could. But maybe it wasn't about replacing that bond. Maybe it was about moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of the grief alone. "I don't know if I can," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We'll help you, sir," the soldier replied, one step at a time. As the veteran sat on the bench beneath the old tree, the weight of his grief still weighed heavily on him. The gentle rustle of the leaves in the wind seemed to mock his pain, each whisper a reminder that time continued to move forward, regardless of his heartache. He could still hear the sounds of the funeral, in the distance the quiet sobs of his fellow soldiers, the somber rhythm of boots on the gravel, the muffled voices of those gathered to pay their respects. But it all felt distant, as if he was trapped in his own world, cut off from everything and everyone around him. He wiped his eyes again, the tears flowing freely now. He had never allowed himself to cry like this before, not in front of anyone. But today it felt different. It felt as though the walls he had built up over the years had finally come crashing down, and the floodgates had opened wide. "I should be stronger than this," he muttered to himself, his voice shaky. He didn't want it to break down like this. He didn't want anyone to see him like this. But the truth was, he couldn't control it. The pain was too much, the emptiness too vast. Suddenly, a soft, familiar sound reached his ears, the quiet tapping of paws against the gravel path. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked up in confusion. Could it be? But there was nothing. The path was empty. No K9, no loyal companion. He felt a pang in his chest, the sharp ache of longing. It had only been a few hours since the ceremony, yet it already felt like an eternity without his K9 by his side. He could still picture the dog's face in his mind, the way the K9 would tilt its head when it was confused, the way its ears would perk up when it heard a sound, the way it would nudge his hand when it wanted affectio. All of those little things. Gone now, the veteran closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the tears coming again, but this time, he fought them back. He couldn't let himself fall apart. Not now. Not here. "You're not alone, sir," The voice startled him once again, and he turned to find the same soldier from earlier standing a few feet away. The soldier's eyes were soft with understanding, but there was no pity in them, only empathy. The veteran had been around long enough to know the difference. "Thank you," the veteran said quietly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can keep going." The soldier took a step closer, his voice calm and steady. "You don't have to do it alone, sir. We're here for you, every step of the way." The veteran shook his head, the weight of the world bearing down on him. "I don't know how to move on. I don't know how to live without him. He was everything. He was my partner, my friend." The soldier nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand, but you don't have to forget him. You don't have to move on right away. You can carry his memory with you, and when you're ready, we'll be here to help you take that first step." The veteran looked up at the soldier, his eyes red and swollen. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to let go." "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," the soldier said gently. "It just means finding a way to move forward while honoring what you had. You'll find a way to honor him, sir, and we'll be right here every step of the way." For a long moment, the veteran said nothing. The wind continued to rustle the leaves above him, and the distant sounds of the funeral began to fade into the background. He was no longer sure if the soldier's words had truly sunk in, but they had given him something he hadn't had before: hope. A small spark of it, but it was there. Maybe he could move forward. Maybe, in time, he would learn to carry the weight of his grief without it crushing him. "I don't know how to thank you," the veteran said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I don't think I could ever repay you for what you've done." The soldier smiled softly, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank us, sir. We're a family, and family looks out for each other." The veteran nodded slowly, the weight of the soldier's words settling over him like a blanket. A family. It was a word he hadn't thought much about since he had left the service. But in this moment, with the soldier standing beside him, he understood it in a way he hadn't before. Family wasn't just blood, it was the bond forged through shared experiences, through sacrifice, and through love. And it was a bond he still had, even if it had been tested in ways he never could have imagined. "Thank you," the veteran said again, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone." The soldier gave a small nod and stood in silence, allowing the veteran to collect his thoughts. He didn't rush him, didn't push him to say anything more. The silence between them was comfortable, a quiet understanding passing between them. Finally, the veteran stood up, his body stiff and aching, but he felt something he hadn't felt in hours: a flicker of resolve. Maybe it wasn't about letting go. Maybe it was about remembering, about keeping the memory of his K9 alive in a way that would honor the bond they had shared. And maybe, just maybe, he could find peace in that. "Let's go back," the veteran said softly, his voice steadier now. "It's time." And with that, he took the first step forward. The veteran felt a lump form in his throat as he sat there in the quiet of his truck, the weight of the day settling on his chest. The finality of the loss was hard to process. He had known this moment would come, yet nothing could have prepared him for the crushing reality of it. His K9, his faithful companion, was gone. The pain of it was almost unbearable, but there was something else to something he had never quite expected: a deep sense of gratitude. He remembered the very first time he met his K9. The dog had been just a pup, eager and wide-eyed, with an energy that was infectious. Back then, they were strangers to beings from different worlds who hadn't yet learned the true meaning of loyalty. But over time, through every mission, every deployment, and every challenge they faced, they became more than partners. They became brothers. The veteran couldn't help but smile at the memories. His K9 had been his protector, his confidant, his best friend. And now, in the quiet of the truck, the veteran swore to never forget the bond they shared. He shifted in his seat, wiping his eyes. The tears, which had been relentless earlier, seemed to slow now, but the pain still lingered. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small worn photo. It was a picture of the two of them during their first mission together, a time when they had no idea what the future would hold. The image was grainy, a little faded, but the look of determination in his K9's eyes was as clear as day. The veteran chuckled softly, remembering how the dog had never once hesitated in any of their missions, even when danger was close. It was hard to imagine life without his canine by his side. The house felt empty, the days felt longer. For years, it had been the two of them against the world. And now, there was a silence, a void that could never be filled. But the veteran knew that his canine had done his duty, and had done it with honor. That's what mattered most. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of a siren in the distance. He turned his head slightly, glancing out the window. The sound was distant, but it brought with it a flash of memories of the countless times his canine had heard the sirens and reacted instantly, ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. It was moments like these that made the veteran feel the loss even more sharply. His canine had been so much more than just a dog. He had been an extension of himself. The veteran let out a long breath. The wind had picked up, and the sound of it brushing against the trees outside was a reminder of how life continued, even after loss. He couldn't stop the tears now. They came in waves, each one more intense than the last. His heart was breaking, but he also felt an overwhelming sense of pride. His canine had been a warrior, and he had served with honor. He had been a part of something bigger than themselves, and that was something the veteran would carry with him for the rest of his life. The sound of the truck's engine hummed softly in the background as the veteran drove toward home. Each mile seemed to stretch on longer than the last, as if the road itself was reflecting his own sense of loss. The familiar path home felt foreign now. The truck seemed quieter, the air colder. It was a lonely road ahead, but he would walk it. He had to, for his canine, for the life they had shared together. As the truck rolled through the quiet streets, the veteran's mind drifted back to the funeral. It had been a somber affair, a ceremony marked by deep respect and sorrow. Soldiers from all over had gathered to honor the dog that had given so much. The veteran could still hear the sound of the bugle playing taps in the background, its mournful notes filling the air with a sadness that echoed in his very soul. It was a fitting tribute, but it was not enough. Nothing would ever be enough to repay the debt he owed to his fallen canine. The ceremony had been small, but powerful. There were no grand speeches, no extravagant displays, just soldiers standing in formation, their heads bowed in respect. The veteran had stood there, silently, holding back his tears as he watched the flag-draped coffin being lowered into the ground. It felt as if time had stopped, as if the world had momentarily paused to honor the life of this extraordinary animal. The moment had been both painful and beautiful, one that he would carry with him forever. The veteran wiped his eyes again, determined to keep his focus on the road. He couldn't let the grief consume him, not yet. Not when there was still so much left to do. His canine's legacy lived on, not in the tears or the sorrow, but in the actions of those who had been touched by his service. There was still work to be done. There were still lives to save, missions to complete. His canine had given everything for that cause, and it was the veteran's duty to continue that missio. As he reached his driveway, the veteran took a moment to breathe in deeply. The cool night air filled his lungs, and for a brief second, he felt his canine's presence, like a warm memory flooding his chest. He opened the door, stepped out of the truck, and slowly made his way to the front door. The house was quiet, just as it had been when he left. But now it felt different. There was an emptiness that couldn't be ignored. Yet, there was also a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that the time had come to carry on. Inside, the house was exactly as he had left it, still, silent. He glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings. The framed photos on the walls, the couch where he and his canine had spent hours together, the bed where they would rest after a long day of work. It was all still there, but without his canine, it all felt strangely hollow. The veteran sat down on the couch, his head in his hands. For a long time, he sat there in the dark, listening to the silence. He could feel the presence of his canine in the stillness, as if the dog were there, lying by his side. And in that moment, he made a silent promise to the spirit of his fallen partner. He would continue their mission, carry on the legacy. He would never forget. But the veteran knew that he had the strength to push through. He had been given the gift of his canine's loyalty, and he would honor that by living every day with purpose. As the night stretched on, The veteran felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased the pain, but it was the kind of peace that comes with knowing that the love and loyalty shared between a soldier and his K9 will never truly end. The spirit of his K9 would always be with him, guiding him, comforting him, and reminding him of the bond that could never be broke.